Exploring the bizarre. Your e-ticket ride into the world of the paranormal. Strap yourself in as we traverse the universe exploring the unexplained. UFOs, ghosts, lost worlds, cryptozoology, as well as other dimensions. It's time to take back the night. Now, your electrifying hosts of Exploring the Bizarre, Timothy Beckley and Tim Swartz.
Wow. Well, I'm going around in a circle. Look at this. I can't get out of this matrix. I'm being pulled left. I'm being pulled right. I'm being pulled up. I'm being pulled back down. I'm going around and around. How the hell does one get out of the matrix? Tim, do you have any idea? I'm stuck in the matrix. Are you in here with me?
Yes, that's right, ladies and gentlemen. Come see the amazing Matrix. You'll be amazed, you'll be befuddled, and remember, they're all alive.
On the midway of life, right?
That's right, Mr. Beckley.
Indeed. Well, let me get myself a little bit centered here. Oh, I've just landed back in my easy chair. And I have a feeling that we're back in the KCOR radio network here. It all looks very similar, and I see our producer Tina is over there in the corner, and Peter is working on some great animation, and our guests are getting either settled in or running for the door. I'm not quite sure.
If they're smart, they're running for the door, Tim.
There you go. But Tim, so how you be?
Well, we're doing absolutely fantastic. Unfortunately, Halloween is now over, and it's just all downhill for me. I mean, as I've said before, Halloween is my Christmas.
You know who I was for Halloween?
Who's that?
I was an inpatient.
There you go. Did you have to wear like the gown with the butt sticking out and all that?
But I was at NYU Hospital, and you know what their official color is? A brilliant purple.
Really?
Oh, it is. It's great. Everybody walks around in purple instead of drab grays and whites and whatever other colors that one would wear in an emergency room and in the hospital. And, medicine has come a long way, I must say. It's they wanted to weigh me now. Instead of putting me on a little scale, which anybody could do, they brought this thing in the room and hoisted it down from the ceiling. And put me. It's hard to explain. It's kind of like a giant bell or something like that. It wasn't the Glocke, so we don't have. Maybe it was actually. And then they levitated the thing into the air. I don't quite see the purpose in that, but I guess this is the most a modern thing on the scene. Probably get you down to a quarter of an ounce weight-wise, which is very important.
I thought you were gonna say that they lowered you into like a vat of water and then and then measured how much water was displaced once you were put in.
I don't know. I tell you, but we're back here, and we were anxious to get back to our work, because without us, where would the universe be today?
That's right.
We'll have to ask Tessa Dick. I think that's one of the reasons we're here tonight. Anyway, Timo, why don't you tell us who we have on tonight? Because we've got two fascinating people.
Yes, absolutely. Well, it's tonight we have with us Tessa Dick. who has been on the show before, and always happy to have Tessa with us. Now, Tessa is the wife of the late author Philip K. Dick, and Tessa has been publishing her creative writing since 1969, when she sold an article with photographs to Alive magazine. Well, after teaching English and communications at Chapman University for 12 years, she retired in order to devote full-time to her writing. Her memoir, Philip K. Dick, Remembering Firebright, tells the story behind her husband's pink light experiences, and her other books include Tessa B. Dick, My Life on the Edge of Reality, Murder Lies, Lavinia Stout Mysteries Book 2, Conversations with Philip K. Dick, and of course, I have to throw in there, she has the opening to our book, The Matrix Control System of Philip K. Dick and the Paranormal Synchronicities of Timothy Green Beckley. And with Tessa tonight, we also have Smiles Lewis. Now, Smiles has had a lifelong interest in all things anonymous, and at an early age, he recalled his nightly dreams as well as several personal experiences with ESP, precognition, and dream switching bolstered his interest in the paranormal. Seems like all of us had our start at an early age when it comes to this kind of stuff. Now, Smiles is a lover of all books and has collected over 1,000 titles before he founded the nonprofit Anomaly Archives that serves as the lending library of the Scientific Anomaly Institute. I should also mention that Smiles is also, his daytime job is with the Texas State Library and Archives Commission's Talking Book Program. And as somebody that has had several relatives throughout my life who were blind and used the Talking Book Program, including my father in his later days, I want to applaud Smiles for his work with the Talking Book Program because it's just an absolutely fantastic program nationwide. And I know that when I worked in PBS in Indianapolis, they worked with the Indiana Talking Book Program, and I volunteered a number of times, reading the daily newspaper and things like that. So Tessa Dick, Smiles Lewis, thank you very much for being with us tonight on Exploring the Bizarre.
Thank you. Well, thank you for having me.
Well, Smiles, I wanted to start out asking you something about your background. I know you're interested in all of these subjects, and you have this incredible library, which probably my collection will end up in someday, hopefully a little bit later down the road.
Right.
But how did you? I mean, that's a pretty deep interest to spend your time cataloging literature in the field, because there is such a massive amount of it. How did you get involved in all of this? I mean, obviously, it's more than just a superficial picking up of a copy of Major Kehoe's book, like a lot of people did. And whose collections do you actually have in the library?
Well, I got involved in an interest in the paranormal through those personal experiences. Nothing too dramatic, but strange experiences of apparent telepathy with my mom growing up, and some apparent precognitive visions or dreams. Again, nothing too significant, not like predicting, airplane crashes or anything like that, but just little things on a personal level, extreme cases of deja vu that might be explainable by most skeptics through some kind of brain trick of neurochemistry or whatnot. But it was also that recall of dreams every night, because we every day we experience the paranormal in the realm of the virtual reality that is our dream time. And it was that interest in growing up on science fiction that just primed me for an interest in UFOs. And of course, growing up on that science fiction and TV shows like That's Incredible and others that chronicled infamous UFO encounters from around the world, I was just fascinated with the possibility of interacting with some actual intelligence on this planet. from elsewhere, since it was so hard to find sometimes right here on planet Earth. But And so I just started, reading voraciously all the books in my public library, my school library, starting off with the classic. I think Daniel Cohen is one of the, classic.
Daniel Cohen. I was on the radio with him many years ago, several times. He used to be on the Barry Farber show. I don't know if you're familiar with Farber, but he was one of the most critical, certainly, of the whole UFO paranormal range of topics. But he had a distinctive way of talking. His very astute literary type gentleman who could captivate an audience with his voice, even if you didn't agree with him. Yeah. As opposed to today, where they slam dunk you into the corner and don't let you up and choke you to death if you don't go along with their current theology.
Yeah. Well, I don't think I ever got the chance to hear that person's radio show, but I'm sure there's some archives out there that need preserving.
Oh yeah. But I believe, now I can't state this for a fact, but I think that was certainly one of the first shows that I was ever, outside of maybe a couple of local programs that I was on, and that would go back to about maybe 1964 or something. He was on I forget, WOR, the same network maybe as Long John was or something. He was late night, but not quite that late. And the paranormal was not his main topic. It was a lot of politics and current events and all. But he would have Daniel Cohen on every once in a while. And Daniel Cohen, I think his books were aimed at a young audience. I mean, they were.
Yeah, and that's how I came across him in my school library. And so right out of high school, I found the local MUFON chapter, got involved with them, eventually led it, got involved with the local abductee experiencer support group, eventually led that, started my own zine publishing on UFOs, mind control, parapsychology, and then started just, of course, I'm collecting books this whole time and meeting other people who are collecting books. And eventually people start, when they get sick of their truth seeking, they would give me their books. And so I'd end up with even more books. And, then I organized the best UFO conference that never happened in 2000.
Oh, my God. Yes.
And so all this led to me going, there needs to be a repository for all this material, not just the books, but the research papers of fellow researchers and seekers and authors. And I was inspired by the likes of parapsychology researcher Ray White with her Exceptional Human Experience Network, the Parapsychological Association and Psychical Library, and over in Sweden, the Archives for UFO Research. And so I was like, there needs to be something like that for paranormal UFO researchers here in North America. And so I founded the nonprofit Scientific Anomaly Institute, Anomaly Archives. And it's grown over the years. We've had a number of small donations, mostly from just, individual seekers of little note, but, here and there, like Dennis Stacy, who was the editor of MUFON Journal for a long time and has written for Omni Magazine and co-edits the Anomalist books series with Patrick Quigent. And then we've had a few others. The biggest, though, as I mentioned on a past appearance with you, was Rob Gerard, the rare bookseller who ran Arcturus Books for so many years. He passed away years ago, and one of the big wigs at MUFON managed to negotiate with the widow somebody to purchase that collection and donate it to our archive here in Austin, Texas. And so we received over 3,000 books. And so now we've got, well over 5,000 books and tons of personal files, paper files, periodicals, and whatnot on all this material and these subject areas, from crop circles to consciousness to parapsychology, telepathy, psychokinesis, and of course, good old UFOs, and lots of stuff on mind control, conspiracy, and parapolitics, deep state stuff. And most recently, we got a donation collection from a local woman who turns out to have been an abductee who was included in the late great abduction researcher Dr. Carla Turner's book, Taken: Inside the Alien Human Hybrid Agenda. And it turns out, so we've got some books from her, the estate of this woman that passed, and also a whole bunch of her personal correspondence, her dream journals for years and years. Turns out she was also involved in the Texas Parapsychological Association years before. But this woman was one of the 8 abductees who were profiled in this book, Taken, by abduction researcher Carla Turner. And of course, sadly, Carla has passed. This abductee has passed, and so have several others in this tome. So, this is like some kind of primary personal source material that's exactly the kind of material that we're looking to preserve for posterity, because so often this kind of material, when somebody passes, the family often doesn't have the same appreciation of this kind of stuff that you or I might, and it inevitably ends up either in a landfill or just going on eBay or just thrown to the winds, and I don't want to see that happen. And so I'm trying my damnedest to make that, make this kind of an archive for North America a reality. There certainly are a number of universities here and there who've taken on individual collections. Of course, y'all have interviewed the librarian at the is it the Clarksburg, where the Gray Barker collection is, and there's a few other individual collections, but even MUFON doesn't really have a good situation with their own collection, and Kufos, I'm not sure how well maintained their library or files are at this point. I know my people that are active with them, like Michael Swords, have pretty dramatic, awesome home done garage style archives, and I think this guy David Marler inherited a lot of Lucius Farish's collection, the UFO news clipping guy. So there are these pockets of archives, and hopefully we can all continue to network and exchange information and preserve this important material. Whether you think it's bunk, whether you're a skeptic who thinks it's all just lunacy, or whether you're a true believer who thinks it's the gospel, I think it's all worth preserving.
Well, now, didn't I read, Smiles, that you're actually looking for new digs for your library?
Yeah, we've been at the same location for the last 9 years, cohabitating a space with another nonprofit that I'm involved with called the Institute for Neuroscience and Consciousness Studies, INACS, and we are on the search for, as you may have heard about this little town I live in called Austin, Texas. It's really,
maybe. Yeah, it's
gotten really popular. And I think increased the rental rates rather horrifically and dramatically. But we are on the lookout, and my mood changes from day to day, from aghast and doomsaying to hey, actually, things are looking up. So right now I'm actually pretty optimistic. I think we've come across some recent properties that seem promising, and we may finally be moving into some bigger digs, which is good because we need the space.
Well, now, are there any special conditions that you have to have for a new location? I mean, naturally you can't move into like a wet, damp basement somewhere.
Right. No, we've already endured our share of little mini disasters, like you might be intimating. Just good and a good HVAC system, good heating and cooling to keep the temperature, climate controlled is the main thing. Dry, but not too dry. We're not at the stage yet where we can have the truly best archival circumstances. In my day job at the State Library and Archives Commission, they are focused on, of course, how to, they've even got, special yellow lighting that you would never want to be under for any length of time, but that's specially designed not to deteriorate the materials. But that we're not quite at that scale yet to have that level of preservation, and even like I said, the inspirations for our archive over in Sweden, I don't quite have that level of archival quality yet. But we've got advisors who are archivists from the State Library, as well as who also work with the University of Texas Harry Ransom Center, that has some of the most amazing collections on the planet, including the Aleister Crowley collection, the Beat Poets collection, all kinds of stuff. And we're actively seeking partnerships with those kinds of institutions. Not so much to take on the material permanently, but to just help us with the preservation process. And thank you for what you said about the Talking Book program. It's been a pleasure working there for 20 years, because it is a great program that is free to people who qualify due to a variety of disabilities. And there's nothing better to me than to get to work with books.
Mm-hmm. Well, I mean, it has a special place in my heart as well, because I had an uncle that when I was a very, very, very young boy, he was blinded in an accident, and so he started using these services quite early. I mean, and the first stuff I remember him getting were actually on vinyl.
Yep.
These like books and magazines and things like that, and then eventually they started coming in like these huge cassette looking almost like big carts. If anybody in radio knows what a cart is. And then eventually, shortly, unfortunately, before he passed away, they started coming digitized. So I mean, it's just it's just an amazing thing to see progress over these years. And then, like I said, my father, in the last years of his life, he got macular degeneration, and so I mean, he relied quite a bit on these books. And so I always made sure, when I worked for the PBS station in Indianapolis, that I would always volunteer whenever needed, to do readings of newspapers or things like that. Unfortunately, I don't have the best voice in the world, but they were happy to have me, suckers.
Darn near every state in this great union of ours has a program that's part of the national network, and there are tons of places that need volunteers. So thank you for your time volunteering, and just about every one of us likely knows somebody who qualifies for the program. It's not just complete blindness; that you can be, like you mentioned, macular degeneration, to things like severe arthritis. If you're physically not able to hold a book, that might qualify you for this program. So.
Well, and it's one of these programs as well that I think needs to have better publicity, because I know there are a lot of people that I've talked to over the years. I mean, they never even heard of such a thing. Yep. And it's like, oh my gosh, there's a lot of places that they'll give you free radios to get their broadcast, their daily broadcast, for those kinds of things. So, but Tim, I see that we have a little less than a minute before we have to go to our break. So when we come back, we'll have to bring Tessa Dick into the conversation, because I know she's been sitting there on her phone patiently waiting for us to shut up so she can talk. So we'll definitely let give Tessa her time. Coming back for more Explore the Bizarre.
Now back to Exploring the Bizarre with two of the most electrifying researchers in the paranormal, your hosts, Timothy Beckley and Tim Swartz.
And welcome back to Exploring the Bizarre. Tonight we are talking with Miles Lewis and Tessa Dick, which we will now bring into the conversation. Tessa, thank you very much for patiently waiting. It's really great to have you with us again tonight.
Oh, my pleasure, I think.
Yeah, no. I promise you, like always, we'll be nice.
Can I plug my most recent book?
Oh, yes, as often as you like.
It's called Conversations with Philip K. Dick. And I was not going to write another book about Phil, but the people who read Philip K. Dick, Remembering Firebright, kind of demanded it. So now you can get Conversations with Philip K. Dick. It's available in several places, but the best place to find it is on Amazon, where I have an author page that lists all of my books. But if you see one that's like $100, I'm not selling that one. It's a book that's out of print, and book dealers are reselling their copies.
Yeah, Tim Beckley and I have often speculated about that because, I mean, these so-called book dealers have a lot of our books listed as well. Books that aren't out of print, yet they have them listed for, like you said, over $100 or so. And it's just like, what person would be foolish enough? I suppose they only need one or two,
Well, I can see the sense in it. They buy 10 or 20 copies when it's first released and hold on to them, hoping to make a profit. And I guess there's nothing wrong with that, but I try to price my books much more reasonably.
Well,
it isn't as if I could make a living anyway.
Well, and I have to say that your most recent book, I thoroughly enjoyed it. I've been reading the copy that you sent us, and it's just I'm so happy that they convinced you to write it. I know that the last time that you were on our show, you talked about that you possibly were going to start doing that. So I'm glad you finally did.
Oh, thank you. It's just that I want to write another murder mystery. I'm being pressured about that, too. It's set in the mountains where I live, and the local people love it, and they want another one.
Oh, yes, you definitely should.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'll go along with them. Do it.
It's a kinder, gentler murder mystery. But the second one will have vampires.
Can't go wrong with vampires.
Seems
and
to
werewolves.
be
and werewolves. There you go.
Those are about as timely topics as you can get. Hey, Tessa, you sent these books on over to us. Let's see, Conversations with Philip K. Dick and My Life on the Edge of Reality. Before we turn the conversation over to Smiles, because I know he has a lot of things that he wants to ask you. I did want to question you about. Now, I know Philip had at least a peripheral interest in UFOs. There were some people that used to hang out, I guess, at his house at one time that I tried repeatedly to get him to go to UFO meetings, I guess, and he kind of hid out. He wasn't all that interested in it because they kind of had a new age approach to the subject. But you did mention in the book in passing some experience that he had with the Men in Black.
Oh, yes. We didn't know about Men in Black at the time, but they were men wearing black suits. So when I learned about Men in Black, which was actually quite recently, because I don't read the UFO stuff either. Well, I didn't till Andy Colvin sent me a handful of books by John Keel. He had me write the introduction to one of his collections of John Keel's writing. Anyway, yeah, he was up in Canada already traumatized by his experiences in San Rafael. And he was not planning to come back to the United States when he was abducted by two men in black suits who put him in the back of a limousine, and one man sat on each side of him and talked to him, questioning him while they drove around the streets of Vancouver in British Columbia. And he couldn't really remember what they had talked about in any detail. But after they took him home, he tried to kill himself, and he believed that they hypnotized him and drugged him and made him swallow a whole bottle of sleeping pills.
Wow.
But he regained consciousness just long enough to call for help.
Mm-hmm. Well, now, Smiles, you've heard of, I guess, stories somewhat similar to that. I know we had a fellow back many, many years ago who called me on the phone and related a similar experience of being driven around and, I guess, debriefed by the Men in Black. Then, I think it was in my UFO Silencers book, I talked about this gal who was actually kidnapped and taken to some building, I think in the Washington, D.C. area, after she had a brief UFO encounter. And she was kept captive there in a building that was totally blacked out with the windows covered over and everything, so she could not ever see where she was taken to. And anyway, these kind of stories seem to pop up from time to time in the UFO field. And have you heard of anything along that line?
Nothing as extreme as what Phil experienced. I mean, there's certainly a number of reports over the years of people having that sort of experience of being led into, coaxed into a vehicle, and then having some sort of time loss or memory loss. The implication being some kind of a drugging.
Yeah. Well, we've had on a couple of times on the program. In fact, I know he just left a message for me the other day, and I have to get back to him. A country and western performer by the name of Johnny Sands, who had an experience New Year's Eve. Can't remember the exact year, but outside of Las Vegas, where he was driving to the Sands Hotel Casino. And he had this experience where a UFO was at the side of the road, and he had some sort of a conversation, telepathic conversation with the beings. And then when he was at the Sands, they came in and they had somebody draw a portrait, rendering of what he had seen. And then he met with this very strange group that had an office who wanted to make a movie or something about his experience. But then when they went back to confer with the producers, the apartment was vacant, and the people that owned the building claimed that nobody had ever, hadn't lived there in months, and certainly there was no TV crew involved. And then he was taken to the desert in a limousine of sorts, and the vehicle was parked there, and there were all these other vehicles aimed their headlights at his car, and he tried to get out, and there were some Bigfoot type creatures guarding the door. You've heard this story, Tim. I've told it. He's told it before on the air.
Oh yeah, definitely. We need to get Johnny back on our show again.
Yeah. Well, he did call, leave a message, and so I will get back to him. And we haven't had him on for a couple of years, and I know our buddy Bill Burns, who has a new book out, is always interested in talking to him. So I think we'll hook him up. Anyway, Smiles, I want to turn the microphone over to you because I know you have some questions to ask Tessa, and we'll get a fresh approach on both her career and on that of her late husband, Philip K. Dick. Maybe we ought to start off with the new Blade Runner. Did you see the movie?
Yes, I did actually, and I was pleasantly surprised. I thoroughly enjoyed it. Of course, I'm not the most discerning critic, perhaps, when it comes to science fiction, but as a fan of the movies, that of course was my introduction to his work, but in a roundabout way. However, the original film introduced me to his work, but it was a decade or more later that I actually became versed in his actual writing, and I became a fan, largely because of my interest in UFOs. It was the UFO scene that actually introduced me to Phil and what I think is his significance and what he has to contribute to thinking on the subject. But Tessa, I just want to say it's a pleasure to meet you, and it's an honor to have the chance to talk to you and to find out a little bit more about yourself and your own life experiences and your experiences with Phil.
Oh, thank you.
Am I correct that you met him in the summer of 1972?
Yes.
And was that at a beach party?
It was supposed to be a beach party, but we ended up at someone's house where we didn't really know anybody. Phil and I both knew Ginger. She had just dumped him, and he was clingy and trying to get her back, and so she was trying to find someone else to be his girlfriend so he'd leave her alone. And this originally she wanted my mother to go, and even though Mom was still married to Dad, she often cheated on him.
Oh.
But Mom didn't want to go. So I went because I was just bored. I just turned 18, finished high school, had nothing to do really. I was just waiting for the fall when I was either going to college or joining the Navy. I was leaning toward the Navy. And then I met Phil.
And so this
dropped all those plans.
And this seemed at the time like a random encounter, but later you and he both would come to feel differently, that maybe there was some force at work.
Oh, Phil always thought it was a setup, and at first he thought I was in on it, but that didn't stop him from taking me home with him.
Well, who would have set it up? I mean, when you say set up, are we talking about some?
Well, I figured that Ginger just wanted him to meet somebody else, but Phil thought that there was something more nefarious going on, and he might have been right. Phil and I both had experienced really strange things beginning in childhood and continuing into adulthood. And he thought that he was in danger somehow, that I might harm him.
You both had come through some rough periods leading up to that first meeting, and I'm really, there's so much I want to ask you about that can go into some very deep areas, but you write about a particularly UFO-like series of experiences or memories from 2 years previous. Could we jump back to your memories of that? I'm speaking of...
I'm not. I've never been convinced that it really was UFOs and aliens. I think it was quite a human endeavor.
Right.
Of course, if you read Phil's books, you come to question just exactly what the word human means.
Indeed.
But the people I saw looked human. They were a little taller than average and darn good looking, but human.
And you even speculated that they could possibly be related to the proximity of the nearby military base, which I believe you said was Edwards.
Well, that's what I was thinking, but more and more I think it's another base because I keep going blank on the name of it. It's a Marine base out in the desert near Victorville. And I still can't, even if I wrote it down, I'm sure I would lose the note where I wrote it. But it seemed like a military base. I'm just no longer certain that it would be Edwards.
And in describing these early age experiences, of course, you were, I guess, 16 at the time of the memory in 1970. And to clarify, was this a memory that you recall having at that time, at that age in 1970? You remember this happening then, or did it emerge later?
Oh, no, I always remembered. I just couldn't make sense of it because I'd have to be in two places at the same time and on more than one occasion, beginning when I was about 6 or 7 years old. I would remember, for example, being at school in the classroom, sitting at the desk. But at the same time, I'd be seeing another place and hearing other people talking to me, and they were kind of transparent. And, well, I tried to get myself certified as crazy because I thought it was insane, but I'm not, I had the MMPI and all kinds of stuff, and I'd never come out as crazy, just very hyper, although I'm not near as hyperactive as my child was. But
so even though you entertain multiple possibilities about the nature of this experience, that these people seem to communicate the idea to you that they were a more advanced civilization. How long did these types of experiences continue on past your meeting of Phil?
I think they pretty much ended in the mid-1990s when I was in my 40s. I'd always been sort of religious, but I started using things I learned from listening to Art Bell interviewing Father Malachi Martin about exorcisms. And I figured I didn't need to be a priest. I didn't even need to be Catholic. I just needed to know what to say to make them go away.
Yeah, I remember in your works, your writings, that you've talked about invoking the name Jesus Christ to deal with what you categorized as demons. But you're saying that also worked with these other more human-like beings?
Well, I'm not positive, but they haven't been bothering me. I think they actually dropped me from whatever program it was while I was still in high school, because I was just not cooperating. They told me they were dropping me when I was 16. And I think maybe they did, but I'll bet they still follow me around. But they don't bother me anymore.
Well, now, Tessa, didn't, I think you describe in conversations with Philip K. Dick, in a series of experiences that Philip had where he was hearing voices transmitting over the radio?
Yes. I also heard the radio, but I just heard popular music. He heard them talking to him and telling him to die. So when he had his pink light experience, it was a form of salvation, literal salvation, saved his life. He was so depressed that having the radio tell him to die really could have pushed him to suicide.
But at least on one occasion, the voices from the radio saved your son's life, correct?
Well, that wasn't from the radio. It was after we shoved the radio into the broom closet and we didn't hear the radio anymore. he actually heard voices in his head, but I couldn't say that he was, just hallucinating because of the content. He got up, he was always taking naps. He was also physically ill, and we didn't really understand what was wrong, but he was ill and took a lot of naps. But he got up from a nap, and he appeared to be in a trance. I really don't think he was fully conscious. And he just said, call the doctor and tell him that our son has an inguinal hernia. And then he went back to bed. Now, he made a big deal out of it in his novels, but you need to keep in mind that those are fiction.
Yeah.
He's a storyteller, and he told great stories, but they're embellished and exaggerated versions of what actually happened. Anyway, I did call the doctor, and our son did have an inguinal hernia, but he wasn't old enough to have the surgery to correct it. So we had to make sure that that baby did not cry. And he was a screamer. We had to keep him quiet for months before he was 18 months old and he could have the surgery to correct the hernia, because his screaming and crying caused the hernia to get worse. And if it got strangulated, then his life would be in danger. But there was no emergency room. We went to a specialist, and the specialist ripped our doctor a new one for not catching it sooner.
Well, I wonder.
Everything turned out fine.
I wonder if perhaps then that might have been a different type of experience than some of the other phenomena. But
all right, well, we're gonna have to interrupt you right now because we are coming up to our top of the hour break. We'll continue this conversation when we come back, though. You're listening to Exploring the Bizarre, and our guests tonight are Smiles Lewis and Tessa Dick. So please stay tuned for more.
Exploring the bizarre. Your e-ticket ride into the world of the paranormal. Strap yourself in as we traverse the universe, exploring the unexplained. UFOs, ghosts, lost worlds, cryptozoology, as well as other dimensions. It's time to take back the night. Now, your electrifying hosts of Exploring the Bizarre, Timothy Beckley and Tim Swartz.
And welcome back to Exploring the Bizarre. Tonight we are talking with Smiles Lewis and Tessa Dick. And Smiles, before I let you continue your conversation with Tessa, I just wanted to ask her real quick now previously, you were talking about the radio and its mysterious and disturbing messages. Now, in some of Phil's books, he said that this radio wasn't even turned on or even plugged in. Now, was this true, or is this an embellishment?
That was true.
So, in other words, this radio was broadcasting, playing music, to you and verbal messages to him, but without any apparent power source.
Right, but if there's enough of a charge in the air, whether it's a microwave radiation or a strong radio signal, it can make a radio play. It can even play on some people's dental work. And this was, back in the days when, even though it was solid state, it did have tubes.
Mm-hmm. Well, I remember Was it? I think an urban legend with was it Lucille Ball said that she was receiving radio broadcast on her fillings at one time. Of course, who knows if that's true or whether or not she was just joking or not.
Oh, it does sometimes happen, not just on Gilligan's Island.
Oh well, I know that when I was working in Indianapolis, the video camera setup that I was using, it was called an ENG unit, electronic news gathering, and there would be a certain spot in that city that when I would be using a plugged-in microphone, this was a microphone that was wired and plugged into the camera, it would start receiving a local radio station. But you had to be in this certain area for that to happen. I mean, I don't know if the transmitter was fairly close by, and it was just the perfect resonance. But we just always thought that that was kind of weird. But so okay, Smiles, I'll let you continue your conversation here.
Well, all of those things intrigue me because, of course, Tessa in her books talks about those ideas as being some of the things that she and Phil explored as possible explanations. I gather from this idea of microwave energy and other ways of sending signals to electronic speakers, radios that aren't even plugged in, don't have power, but can still receive energy and transmit. But as I was saying before the break, it's very difficult often, as it is in so many of these strange phenomena, to not wheat from chaff so much as just to try to parse the different types of experiences and possible explanations. It almost sounds like, okay, if we do entertain, a mind control or some kind of covert psychotronic aspect to Phil's experiences, in this particular the classic Valis encounter experiences, the case of that I was mentioning of a voice or inside his head mentioning the hernia, could just perhaps be an example of innate psychic ability that maybe in his altered state of pain induced or whatnot was tuning him into that. The matrix underlying everything. And he, in that instance, got that message from the universe that or God or Valis or Zebra, that there was, this specific situation with your son. And it's that multiplicity of possibilities that I have always struggled with, and obviously experiencers of all varieties struggle with, especially the more intelligent ones like yourself and Phil, who were able to see all the multiple possibilities. So Tessa, I guess there's again so many directions I want to go in, but specifically with regard to the radio weirdness. Was that before or after y'all noticed the moving truck and workers and coveralls bringing in that mysterious electronic equipment you found in the apartment next door?
Well, the radio began before then, but the voices in his head began after that. So perhaps there was something more portable to begin with, and then the electronics next door somehow got into his head. And the CIA pretty much admitted during the Iraq War that they used voice of God technology to get voices to tell the Iraqi soldiers to lay down their guns and surrender.
Yeah. And it's that kind of technology that has fascinated me for so long, because it really complicates the nature of what people think of as UFO encounters or even just paranormal phenomena. There's so many ways that could be used to deceive people. But again, I with the example of the hernia, if that was human generated, the message in his head that spoke of that, then they would need to have some knowledge somehow of the child's condition. And so that's why I was thinking maybe that's just more indicative of an innate psychic ability. And certainly in your own childhood, you had a number of experiences that would seem to intimate either contact with possibly some kind of, MK Ultra like, you referred to the longitudinal studies that both of you apparently had been enlisted in, but it could also have a more traditional paranormal or spiritual or psychic interpretation. You talk of your experience with guardian angels and voices that would help you through your life, your early life, and perceptions of things that most people would regard as hauntings and spirits. I'm wondering if you can give us more of a sense of, I guess, your psychic life, so to speak. And did you consider yourself to be a psychic sensitive in the classic sense, or would you ascribe that to some other type of spirituality?
Well, first, it was more like a smorgasbord. It was not any one thing, but some psychic events, some quite human mind control program, and, just a little of everything. But I suppose it is not uncommon for a young child to have an imaginary friend. Mine happened to be an angel, but I was still seeing him till I was 9 years old. And shortly before my baby sister was born, he told me he wouldn't talk to me anymore because people would think I was crazy. Then he quit talking to me.
And did
anyway, he might have been imaginary, but he was real to me.
Do you tend to think of those as being more likely indicative of a psychic ability for you personally?
Perhaps. I do know that, I have clear memories of him talking to me when I was 2 years old, and it was just common sense daily stuff, nothing woo-woo or mystical. It was just like, oh, your dad's home now, you better get out of his chair so he can sit down, that kind of thing.
Yeah, that strikes me as more traditionally psychic. I in the beginning of the show, I was mentioning my own personal experiences that I ascribe as being psychic, but they weren't. They were very mundane, everyday kinds of things. They weren't, visions of earthquakes or natural disasters necessarily.
Well, within the family where I was growing up, we often just knew things without saying them out loud.
Exactly.
But it doesn't, you can't just, or at least I can't, go around and read your mind and pull things out. But I have noticed that if people are thinking at me hard enough, I do pick up on it. Now, I don't try to. It's disturbing.
Well, I think in also one of your books, you mentioned I forget the psychiatrist's name who was working with schizophrenics and was trying to test his hypothesis that schizophrenics, that the voices and perceptions that they were experiencing may in fact have been related to some sort of form of telepathy. And while I'm not trying to say that you were schizophrenic, I think there are a lot of creative types that walk that line and may have a thinner veil with the other side, that information realm, perhaps.
Well, I try to shut it off. That was Harry Stack Sullivan. He actually deliberately went around the ward where the paranoid people were, and he would just think violent thoughts toward them or call them names without saying it out loud. And the patients would walk up to him and repeat word for word what he had been thinking. So maybe we ought to pay attention to that. I just can't get comfortable with psychic phenomena. They're too weird. So I try not to let them happen.
Right. Well, and you talk about how you and Phil speculated about the probable implications of mind control and psychotronic technology. That he was particularly concerned. At some point, he kind of seemed obsessed with the film Manchurian Candidate, which I forget, but I think that movie came out before the MK Ultra documents were made public. The programs were made public. And
well, it came out shortly before the JFK assassination, and that's why it was pulled from theaters and never shown on television until the late 1970s, because it was too much like the JFK assassination.
Yeah.
So I had never seen it, and he didn't explain it to me.
Were you with regard to the discovery of the electronic equipment next door? Did that added to though this sense of possible manipulation?
Yes, I thought it was Blackie. Time for the squirt gun. All I have to do is show it to her.
Channeling from the animal kingdom.
Yeah. Blackie, do I have to spritz your face? Yeah, I did. Okay, she's gone. Well, she's been fed and petted and brushed and had her treats and a fresh bowl of water, so she has no business meowing at me. But she thinks I'm not allowed to talk.
That's better than the rest of the guests get. Hey, Tessa, I have a question here. Many questions, but one in particular. Now, we've written about, and you did the introduction to the book on the Matrix and Philip K. Dick. He talked about a computer simulation, that we were living in a computer simulation as early as 1977. Well, certainly most people didn't have a computer in 1977. Did he have one? And what did he think about the development of the computer? And do you think he would have thought that it was possible that we would be doing all that we do today on our computer?
Oh, Phil never had a computer. He never even had an electric typewriter. He did plan to record all his vinyl LPs onto reel-to-reel tape, but he never did it. But he really liked the analog technology, and it does have advantages over digital. I have records, but my record player quit working. And I have a turntable that I should hook up to the amplifier, but I don't have speakers for it. So I'm stuck with digital for now.
Well, then how did he get hooked on the idea about this computer simulation that supposedly we're living in?
Oh, simple. He read about artificial intelligence. For example, I think it was Psychology Today had a feature article on the ELIZA program. It was not a voice, it would type. You would type in questions, and the computer that you couldn't see would type answers that you would see on your computer screen. And it was pretending to be a psychotherapist. And some people thought that they were communicating with a human. But Eliza, after Eliza Doolittle in My Fair Lady or Pygmalion, it was actually a very primitive form of AI, but it did fool some people. And Phil was always into the illusions that can fool us into thinking that they're real.
And I believe he delivered that famous speech at a conference, a science fiction conference in France.
Yes, in Metz. I think it was 77.
And you write about how there were a number of French students and filmmakers who were coming to interview him, and certainly the work of Jean Baudrillard and this idea of simulation and simulacra, that's one of the main themes in his work is how do you know what is real, and this some of the leading research in the parapsychological realm deals with what are called metachoric experiences, the complete replacement of one's perceptual field with a hallucination. I think just the themes that he was dealing with of what is real and the nature of a simulated reality. I mean, the experiences he had where he described the overlay, and actually akin to some of your childhood experiences that you describe of feeling like you're in two places at once. Perhaps that was what led him to this ability to conceptualize this idea that we could be living in a simulation.
In novel after novel, story after story, to name two in which this prior ugly present obtained most clearly, I cite The Man in the High Castle and my 1974 novel about the U.S. as a police state called Flow My Tears, the Policeman Said.
Could be. And he had some experiences that might seem trivial, but for example, when he came home one evening to a dark house and couldn't find the light switch, instead of concluding that he had forgotten where it was, he concluded that someone had moved it while he was gone. And so he wrote a story about it, more than one story, but the one that comes to mind is, and I'm blank on it. There was a movie about it too. Not Reconstruction.
It's the one that the movie has the word bureau in the title, but that's not the name of that's not the way that he used it in the short story. Adjustment Bureau, Adjustment Team. Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Wow.
That interview, or rather that speech he gave is just absolutely amazing, and especially for its time.
Very prescient. He didn't see himself as foreseeing the future so much as describing the real world. He didn't think of these weird things as, just fantasy. They were a form of reality that is hidden from us.
So, I'm sorry, Smalls, go ahead.
Oh, well, so I've heard you, Tessa, give an alternate explanation, perhaps, to his infamous pink beam Valis experiences, and it seems that you're not just poo-pooing it or writing it off, but you give a much more mundane explanation for that. Can you expound on whether you feel that experience has any sort of metaphysical basis versus just him, having some mundane experience that he then extrapolated this whole series of the vast exegesis that he wrote?
Oh no, he had real mystical experiences pretty much throughout his life. and he wanted them to be more dramatic. So he did exaggerate and embellish, but they were quite real and quite unusual, to say the least. He really was in contact with something. I'm just not sure that it was the good guys. I think what first contacted him on the radio definitely meant him harm. And then somehow a more calm and kind voice managed to reach him and save him from harm.
All right, Tessa, I need to interrupt you here because we're going to our bottom of the hour break. So when we come back, we will continue our conversation with Tessa Dick. So stay tuned for more.
Now back to exploring the bizarre with two of the most electrifying researchers in the paranormal. Your hosts, Timothy Beckley and Tim Swartz.
All right, and welcome back to Exploring the Bizarre. And Tim, it just seems like whenever we reach this time, we're at the less than a half hour left in the show, and it just seems like we've just got started. The conversation's getting interested, and then here we are.
Call has been forwarded to an automated voice messaging.
Oh goodness! But I wanted to ask. Smiles, and then Tessa, you can bring in on this as well. But listening to Tessa talk about Phil, especially when she said he had been taking a nap. And he basically came up and told her almost like in a trance state that their son needed medical attention. That and some other things. To me, a lot of the stuff that Phil was going through is very reminiscent to shamanistic experiences. What do you think about that, Smiles?
I think that you could definitely think of him as a modern day shaman. Shamanism is something that I've thought of in the context of UFO encounters and dealing with the paranormal for a long time, and I think has a lot of relevance to it. In our modern age, we really have been cut off from those people in our community who have these abilities to access this realm of information that I think is implied by parapsychological data, the psychic phenomena that people have reported throughout human history. And so I that's what I was trying to imply, is that I think that may be, while he may have been experiencing, and they both may be experiencing examples of human-generated mind control programs and psychotronic technologies, I think that there is also a psychic component here, possibly, that might be a perfect indicator of this tapping into the vast underwiring of the universe and the ability of the human consciousness to access information, because that's all it all is, energy, information, that we think of as the physical world, and bring that back and have it have a real world value in the saving of the physical vessel of the child in this case. And so I think that is kind of a modern example of what some might think of as a cyberpunk shaman. Back in the 90s, when I was publishing my zine, Adam Gorightly and a good friend, Stephen Mizrak, who was a budding anthropologist, both wrote articles about Philip K. Dick's experiences in the context of mind control. But one of those writers, the Mizrak, the anthropologist, talked about Phil as an example of the first cyberpunk ufologist, somebody who was tapping into these ideas about the interfacing of human consciousness with technology as a form of modern shamanism. So I think you're spot on there.
Yeah, and Tessa, I don't know if you heard my question, but I basically I was asking whether or not it was under your impression that some of Phil's experiences were reminiscent of shamanistic experiences.
Oh, absolutely. Sorry, I let the phone's battery go dead, and I had to get it plugged back in.
No problem.
Anyway, yeah, well, this smart aleck phone is smarter than I am. Anyway, Phil definitely was fascinated by shamanism. And when I first met him, he was pretending to be a Zen guru. It was funny sometimes. I mean, amusing, not odd. But, for example, someone would ask him to say something Zen, and he would either ask, what is the sound of one hand clapping? Or he would say, the Buddha is a piece of toilet paper. And that is an actual Zen saying. But to people who didn't know that, it just seemed like a joke. The point of it, of course, is that no human being is more important than any other. So don't worship the Buddha.
It seems like that that's something that people want to do. I mean, always, but naturally with modern society, that they're looking for somebody to worship.
Yeah, and it's really not a healthy way to go. It's for your sanity, anyway, or what's left of mine. Sometimes I really wonder, but I tend to be pragmatic, and if it works, okay. If it doesn't work, don't do it. So,
Smiles, do you have some additional questions that you'd like to ask Tessa?
Oh, so many that we'll never get to tonight. But I have some questions from a friend who's also a very spiritual person and also a fan of Phil's writing, both fiction and nonfiction, if you consider the exegesis nonfiction. Speaking about the idea of idolizing, an individual, whether they be a Buddha or just your neighbor or your congressman. I certainly have idolized Phil in a lot of ways, and I suppose it's probably a little awkward for Tessa and others who the many of us that call ourselves dickheads, either because we're just a fan of his fiction or because we actually think that there's something to be gained by analyzing his fiction and his nonfiction. But this friend of mine wanted me to ask you, Tessa, to what extent should the exegesis be taken seriously, either as psychic reality or a meta commentary? Can we learn to live better lives from it?
Oh, wow. Well, yeah. I think we should look at it as an exploration, not an answer, but just a journey into the bizarre and unusual that, while really strange, is also really real. Phil didn't make it up out of thin air. These things really happened to him. And he really wanted what they call the exegesis now to be just the notes for a serious thesis, something like a doctoral thesis, or a real scholarly book. And of course, he didn't live long enough to organize all those notes and just write a paper from them. So they're very raw because they're not his finished writing. They're not polished at all. And I think some of them might have disappeared as well. I do know that what has been published, while nowhere near to being all of it, is really the meat of his exegesis. He had a lot of repetition in his notes, but they run something like 10,000 pages, so they couldn't possibly be published as one book. Anyway, his experiences were quite real. And when he wrote things that seemed way out, to him that was reality. And I think he was onto something. In fact, modern physicists, actually they're accused of being more religious than scientific, but they're coming to conclusions that Phil had already reached more or less intuitively without studying electrons and protons and strings and quarks.
Well, in reading what's been published from that Tessa, now it's you know there it's so deeply personal. Can anybody else take anything away from that, or is it? I mean, do they have to have their own personal experiences? I mean, I don't know if I'm explaining that correctly or not, but I mean, Phil was writing down his personal spiritual journey. Can that be something that that anybody else can read, or do they need to take that dream walk on their own?
Oh, I think it's just it might seem helpful if you've had an experience, but it's just as useful as any literature. For example, The Magic Mountain, Thomas Mann's gigantic, thick novel that they made me read in college. I've never had tuberculosis. I've never been in a sanitarium. Back then they were for sick people, not mentally ill. But I can take something from reading The Magic Mountain. Or, was it? I think it's Dostoevsky's Crime and Punishment. I've never committed murder, but I can learn something from reading his novel about a murderer. It's literature, and it has value. I think even comic books and romance novels have some value, but Phil was trying to explore something much deeper. And it's a lot like Mozart's The Magic Flute. It's a journey through magic, but with real lessons for real life.
And it can be so hard sometimes to get that out. You know the feeling, but sometimes getting it out and turning it into words, that's a whole different animal, so to speak.
Yes, and quite often words fail, but he was an author and he had pretty good command of the language. Don't consider his prose quite as polished as some other authors, but man, could he tell a story.
And from a thousand different perspectives.
Oh yeah. That's one reason why his novels seem to have half a dozen main characters in each one. He needed to tell the story from more than one point of view, because each of us actually lives in a different reality from other people. We just don't ordinarily need to know that. For example, I was at dinner with my dad and his wife, and a drunk at the next table kept shouting every time my father tried to talk. My back was to the drunk, but Dad was facing him. That drunk would start shouting every time Dad opened his mouth. So I finally had enough and turned around and confronted the drunk. And Dad's wife, not Mom, but his second wife, was humiliated because I made such a scene, and she could never go to that restaurant again because I embarrassed her. Well, that wasn't how I saw it.
Was this the woman who did her dissertation on Phil?
Yeah, that was Nita. I think the web still has it under her maiden name, well, not maiden name, first husband's name, Petrunio. Now she's Nita Busby. Dad has passed away, by the way, 3 years now. He was 86, so he had a good long run. But, yeah, Nita's still alive, but in assisted living. I can't say early onset Alzheimer's because she's like 85 now. So it's just Alzheimer's, but not early onset. Anyway, yeah, she saw it completely differently. I had my pepper spray ready. The drunk actually got up from the table and threatened to rip me a new one.
Wow.
When I asked him to quit shouting.
Good for you.
Yeah.
Yeah. Pepper spray.
Yeah, well, at first I was holding my steak knife and considering how I might use it, and then I decided the pepper spray would work better.
The non-lethal option.
But I find that an interesting point, though. What you were saying, how everybody's perspective can be, so different. And I know, Smiles, that, you've written about this before. You look at UFO experiences. I'll just bring that back because I know that's Tim Beckley's and I's favorite talking point, how you'll have, multiple witnesses, and yet a lot of times you'll get such, like really vastly different stories on what they saw and they experienced. And so, I mean, something just as, I can't really say mundane as confronting a loud drunk in a restaurant. But yeah, I mean, here you pull everybody aside and everybody will tell sometimes, very similar stories. And then other times, just, completely different than what you remember.
Yeah, emotionally charged incidents, especially, in my own personal life, I've over the last few years in talking to my mother, discovered vastly different remembrances of specific incidences that we both remember, but we remember them very, very differently. And sure enough, the Air Force certainly has records of, we did a flare drop and we got these amazingly different reports from witnesses ranging from, I could see the beings inside the windows.
I lost the audio.
We hear you.
I hear you guys.
Well, we can hear you, Tessa.
Well, I can hear you now, but you dropped for a minute.
Oh, okay. Okay. Smile. I'm sorry. Go ahead and continue what you were saying.
Just like you say, that there can be vastly different perceptions, and the more emotionally charged the incident, the more different I think those perceptions tend to be. So, the one person in Tessa's example, the wife of her stepmother, perceives it as just an embarrassment, and whereas it could have been a life-threatening situation if this person had gotten physically violent.
Well, she wasn't even considering that. She was just embarrassed at my outburst.
Yeah, how dare you embarrass her like that, right?
I was ready to threaten the manager with losing his liquor license for serving alcohol to a drunk.
Somebody who was already set to go, right?
Right. Anyway, there are plenty of examples like that. And then there's my mother, who would argue with me about things that happened when she was not there. So how in the world could she have any idea what actually happened?
Tessa Smiles, unfortunately, we are coming to the last 3 or 4 minutes of the show, so I want to give both of you an opportunity to let our listeners know about where they can find out more about you. Smiles, why don't you go ahead and go first? Books, websites, articles, anything that our listeners would love to find out about you.
Okay, well, thank you, Tim's, for having us on the show tonight, and thank you, Tessa, for talking to me. Most recently, I was honored with being a contributor to the anthology UFOs Reframing the Debate, that features over a dozen authors contributing their ideas towards trying to solve the UFO enigma by looking at it from a different perspective. That was edited by Britain's Robbie Graham and has a foreword by religious scholar Diana Walsh-Pasulka. That's UFOs Reframing the Debate. Again, honored to be a part of that. Fantastic book. But if folks want to find out more about me, they can find it at smileslewis.com. And of course, my nonprofit lending library is locatable at anomalyarchives.org. So Tessa, what are you doing these days?
Well, I have a blog, TESSADICK.com. I'm all over Facebook. I joined Twitter, but I don't do much with it. And of course, all my books can be found on Amazon, where I have an author page. Oh, wow. And believe me, I'm not getting rich. I'm on Social Security, and that's about it.
What's the titles of your 2 most recent books?
Well, Conversations with Philip K. Dick, and I'm not sure. Might as well go with My Life on the Edge of Reality. It's about my own childhood and on into adulthood, but it barely skims the surface.
And you say that you're working on a new murder mystery, hopefully?
I hope so. Yeah, Murder Lies is the first one, so the second one will be Murder Bleeds, which is a fitting title for vampires.
Well, I'm looking forward to reading that, and when you get that published, we'll have you back on to talk about it. Well, and unfortunately, guys, I'm going to have to wrap the show up tonight. So thank you both very much for being with us on Exploring the Bizarre. And both of you have a great evening and a great weekend coming up. Good night, all.
You've been listening to Exploring the Bizarre with hosts Timothy Beckley and Tim Swartz. They're taking back the night by jetting non-stop across the cosmos in search of the truly bizarre and totally unexplained, with you as their co-pilot. Thursday nights at 7 p.m. Pacific, 10 p.m. Eastern, on the KCOR Digital Radio Network. For more information on Exploring the Bizarre and hosts Timothy Beckley and Tim Swartz, check out their KCOR Digital Radio Network page. Follow their YouTube channel at MRUFO 1100. Exploring the Bizarre.